many of the presentations from this morning, I feel we need to give a meta comment. I work on narrative, and it's almost essential that if you're working on narrative, you're able to spin into narrative. So my presentation today is going to be a little more story-based, pulling from the data that I collected both from an archive and from interviews. But first, I want to thank Juan Luis and everyone here for having organized such a really great and useful, sort of interesting event, and having done it so smoothly and so well. So working cross-disciplinarily is, I think, something that we as scholars generally think is a good idea, and that we think we should do more of. I think that this impulse is really like right on the mark. It enriches our own work while strengthening our individual disciplines. But that said, I'm always rarely apprehensive when I'm ready to sort of introduce my work to a brand new audience. The methodology I've been trying to develop for the study of narrative extends fairly recent efforts of other sociologists who have been doing kind of novel and cutting-edge work within historical topics using social network analysis tools. And while it's cutting edge, oftentimes cutting edge means that you're walking a kind of razor's edge that can both produce sort of high risk and high yield in terms of results. And so while I and others kind of confident that we're on a good path for trying to facilitate more rigorous comparison of large amounts of narrative data, the jury is still kind of out on what kind of impact we're going to have on the disciplines either of history or historical comparative sociology. So with that caveat in place, my talk today will introduce you to my approach to narrative analysis, which adapts social network analysis tools for the study of narrative. And I'll illustrate the method by drawing on my data from my own research, which includes a collection of testimonies and interviews from the border region between Italy and the former Yugoslavia. So my work is situated in a kind of interstitial place between those interested in the order or sequence of events and those concerned with the structure of relationships within a network of social actors. And the new and potentially sort of controversial wrinkle in all of this is that I and others who are trying to adapt these concepts and tools from social network analysis are trying to do it for the study of narrative data. So the nodes in our networks are no longer social actors, they're elements in the narrative. And so why should this be controversial? Well, some critics who are more at ease with the traditional narrative analysis or content analysis see the potential for fetishization of a network tool. And they ask, rightly so, what can be gained using networks that can't be derived through more traditional narrative needs? And then there are others who accept the general approach of social network analysis, but balk at the shift from measuring so-called concrete social relations to measuring relations among story elements within the narrative. So to both of those camps, my response is that my approach has shown actual results, and the results in the forms of patterns of change in narratives over time. And the thing about this, finding these patterns of change is that I'm able to see these things in ways that I wasn't able to see before using more traditional standard narrative analysis. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to walk you through this new method using my data from the current research on this border region between Italy and the former Yugoslavia. It's a region called Istria. And my work follows the evolution of a historical narrative that splits in two just after the Second World War. So the rest of my talk today will use stories told by members of the same families living on opposite sides of the state boundary. Over the course of 50 years, Italian and Croatian historians have come to recall the period around the Second World War utterly differently. And to sort of track the changes within these stories, I'll be introducing you then to this new narrative analysis technique. So because it's not a well-known case, I just want to give you a little bit of historical background so you can kind of contextualize the actual content of the narratives and appreciate the ways in which they change over time. So hopefully this will work. So as noted, the empirical focus is the century-long conflict between Italians and Slavs, mostly Croats and Slovenes, in the northern Adriatic region of Istria. Hostilities between the two sides came to a head in this sort of confused period following the Second World War. Both Yugoslavia and Italy vied for control over the city of Trieste in the north and its neighboring region to the south, Istria. The pre-war period had seen a massive curtailment of ethnic Slavs' rights. The Italian fascist state pursued a brutal campaign of denationalization of the ethnic Slovenes and Croats on its territory. With the capitulation of Italy in 1943, Italians then became the targets, this time of partisan communist troops. And for the next 2 years until war's end, the region bounced between the partisans and the fascists, victimizing local residents along the way for presumed cooperation with one or another group. From 1945 to 1954, the region persisted in a kind of territorial limbo. The western part of the territory, called Zone A, was governed by an allied military government of American and British forces, while the eastern side, Zone B, was controlled by the Yugoslavs. And in the 9 years of this kind of awkward arrangement, more than half of Istria's population fled over the border from Zone B to Zone A. This mass flight has become known among Italians as the Exodus. Well, many of the exiles would later level accusations of genocide against the Yugoslavs and use really charged language such as Holocaust to describe what they went through. This narrative recalls stories of dramatic violence, such as the mass killings of around 500 Istrians in 1 month in 1943 alone, in which perpetrators are accused of flinging both the living and the dead into limestone pits that dot this region. These pits, called foibe in Italian, have become potent symbols of anti-Italian atrocities within the Istrian narrative in Trieste. Even when individuals' lives haven't been touched by the foibe violence, by mentioning the foibe, Istrians in Trieste link whatever injustices or discrimination that they went through to the more violent episode. The violence then lends meaning and importance to the more routine forms of discrimination that they experienced. So if there's any doubt that memory of the past structures present actions through collective notions of identity, we need only to look as far as contemporary commemorations. So just to motivate this part of my talk, I'm going to draw on a document that I received in Trieste. And it's not part of my data per se, but it really nicely illustrates this point about how events sort of link up to create chains of meaning. So, this is a Catholic Mass card. It's from 1998. It commemorates a death 50 years before. And for those of you not familiar with Catholic Mass cards, they're generally handed out at either funerals or their anniversaries, and they're basically what the family or the community or the church wants you to know about the life and the death of this person. So this young man, Giuseppe Varin, was murdered in an Istrian coastal town called Cittadinava, which is also the site of my field research. Now the odd thing about the way Giuseppe's murder is remembered is that he was killed in 1948, but the meaning of his death is shifted to connect to murders in 1943.